"Mom, I think Buddy's trying to leave us. He won't stop sitting by Mrs. Cartwright's door." Those were the first words out of my 12-year-old son Owen's mouth that morning. He stood in the kitchen barefoot, pajama pants dragging on the tile, and his face scrunched with concern like he'd been up all night thinking about it. I was pouring cereal into a bowl and almost spilled the whole box when he said it. "What do you mean he's trying to leave us?" I asked, half laughing, but there was a tightness in my chest. Buddy was our dog. Our sweet, slow-moving golden retriever who had been with us for nearly 9 years. He was the kind of dog you dreamed of having when you were a kid. Loyal, gentle, with a permanent dopey smile and eyes that could melt your worst day. "He keeps going over there. I saw him again just now," Owen said. "He's just sitting by her door like he's waiting for something. He doesn't even wag his tail. He just waits." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped out onto the porch. It was early spring, and the morning air was still cool and smelled faintly of wet grass. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a small Tennessee town, and from the porch I had a clear view of the neighbor's door. Sure enough, there he was. Buddy, sitting perfectly still on Mrs. Cartwright's doormat, facing her closed front door with his ears perked and his tail motionless. He didn't even glance in my direction when I called his name. "Buddy, come on, boy. Breakfast." Nothing. Owen stood next to me, watching too. "See? He just sits there. He's been doing it every morning." It wasn't like Buddy to ignore food. He usually trotted toward the sound of a cereal box or crinkly bag like a bear, hearing a honey jar crack open. But now he just sat there, as still as a statue. Mrs. Cartwright had lived next door for years, but we didn't know her well. Her husband had passed away about a year ago, and after that, she mostly kept to herself. Lights off most of the time, curtains drawn, mail piling up, the kind of quiet that makes you nervous. Buddy had been friendly with her, though. When she and her husband used to walk their spaniel, Daisy, Buddy would run up and wag his tail so hard his whole body would wiggle. Even after Daisy passed, Buddy sometimes sat by their gate like he was waiting for someone to come out and play. I walked across the yard barefoot, the grass damp and cold under my feet. Owen trailed behind me as I crouched beside Buddy and scratched behind his ears. "Hey, what are you doing over here, huh?" He didn't move. He blinked once, slow and steady, and leaned just slightly against the door. "Do you think something's wrong with her?" Owen whispered. The thought made me pause. Mrs. Cartwright hadn't been out in days, at least not that I'd seen. Her trash bins were still on the curb from earlier that week, and her porch light was still on, even though it had been sunny for 3 days straight. I stood and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Mrs. Cartwright, it's me, Katie, from next door. Just checking in." Still nothing. Owen fidgeted beside me. "Should we call someone?" I hesitated. It wasn't like I could just barge in, and maybe she was fine, just sleeping or visiting someone. But something about the way Buddy stayed glued to that door made my stomach twist. I gave it one more knock, then turned and said, "Let's give it until noon. If we don't see any sign of her by then, we'll call someone." Back at the house, Buddy stayed behind. It was noon when I called the non-emergency line. I explained that we were concerned about a neighbor, hadn't seen her in a few days, and our dog had been sitting by her door without moving. The dispatcher sounded calm, but took it seriously. An officer arrived about 15 minutes later, a young man with sandy hair and a soft-spoken manner. He knocked, called out, and eventually circled around to look in the windows. Then he used a radio to ask for permission to enter. When he stepped inside, I held my breath. He emerged a few minutes later and waved us over. "She's okay," he said with a small smile. Just dehydrated and weak. Looks like she may have had a dizzy spell and couldn't reach the phone. We're getting paramedics here now. But she's conscious. Your dog probably saved her." Owen lit up like a firework. "Buddy knew?" "Seems like it. He probably heard something, or maybe he just had a feeling. Dogs can be like that." Buddy finally got up when the paramedics arrived and the door opened. He padded slowly back to our porch and plopped down by the steps, watching everything calmly. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I gave Buddy an extra scoop of food and sat beside him on the porch as the stars started peeking out. He rested his head on my lap. "You're something else, you know that?" He sighed contentedly. Over the next few days, things got stranger. Buddy went back to her porch every morning. Even though she was in the hospital recovering, he kept sitting in that same spot, staring at the door. "It's like he's waiting for her to come home," Owen said on the third day. "Like he doesn't want her to be alone." I nodded. Maybe he thinks she still needs someone. Eventually, I called the hospital and asked how she was doing. The nurse told me she was getting stronger and might be discharged by the end of the week. I asked if I could visit. I brought a card from Owen and a small vase of flowers. When I stepped into her hospital room, she looked up at me with tired, grateful eyes. "Katie," she said softly, "you found me." "Buddy found you," I replied, and her lip quivered. She reached out and held my hand for a long time. We sat and talked for almost an hour, about her late husband, about Daisy, about how the silence in her house had gotten so loud it felt like someone was shouting. "But your dog," she said, smiling gently. "He didn't seem to mind the quiet. He just sat there, and somehow I knew I wasn't forgotten." When she returned home, Buddy was there waiting. He stood when she stepped out of the car and wagged his tail for the first time in days. She bent down slowly and cupped his shaggy face. Her shoulders shook as she buried her face in his fur, and I saw tears roll down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for sitting." I didn't say anything. I just watched, heart swelling, as my dog gave her something no one else could. Hope. We thought that would be the end of it, but that was only the beginning. The next morning, Buddy was already gone from the porch when I came downstairs. I checked the clock on the wall. Barely 6:30. Owen hadn't even stirred yet. The coffee hadn't brewed. But somehow Buddy had slipped out without making a sound. I peeked outside, and sure enough, there he was. Back at Mrs. Cartwright's door. Only now, the door was open. Just a crack. And there she was, in her robe and slippers, standing behind the storm door, with a hand gently resting on the handle. She wasn't letting him in. She wasn't talking. Just standing there. And Buddy. He sat, tail wagging once every few seconds, like he knew the wait was over. I didn't want to intrude, but the scene felt fragile, like a single word might shatter it. I stood there watching until Owen padded up behind me and whispered, "Is she home already?" "Looks like it," I said. Mrs. Cartwright slowly opened the storm door and crouched to stroke Buddy's head. He didn't lunge or lick or bark, just leaned in. The way she smiled, it was like she hadn't felt something soft in a very long time. Over the next few days, a quiet routine developed. Buddy would head over first thing in the morning, sit on her porch, and wait. She started leaving the door open wider. Sometimes she'd sit beside him with a book in her lap. Other times, they both just stared off into the trees together. I offered to bring over a thermos of coffee one morning, just to say hello. She invited me in. The house smelled like dust and linen spray, and there was an old music box playing faintly from a shelf in the corner. The television was off, and a teacup rested by her elbow. Buddy was already curled up near her feet. "He's a visitor I didn't know I needed," she said softly. I nodded. "He's good at showing up when you least expect it." She looked at me for a long time before speaking again. "You know, I haven't had anyone in this house since Harold died. It felt wrong somehow. Like if I invited the world in, it meant I was ready to move on. And I'm not. I'm just not." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Buddy wagged his tail, just once. By the end of that week, Buddy had started doing something new. In the afternoons, after his morning with Mrs. Cartwright, he'd return home, nap under the table. And then in the late afternoon, he'd wait by the back door again. One day, I followed him. He trotted across the street and into the woods behind the cul-de-sac. I kept my distance but watched him take a narrow, leaf-covered path I hadn't noticed before. It led to a small clearing where a single park bench stood under a cluster of dogwoods. There was a man there. He looked up as I stepped forward. He was maybe in his early 70s, white hair combed neatly back, dressed in jeans and a jacket that looked worn but well cared for. He smiled when he saw Buddy. "Well, hello there, traveler," he said. Buddy wagged his tail and nudged the man's hand. "You know this dog?" I asked, startled. "Don't know his name, but he's been visiting for 3 days straight. Always around this time. He just sits for a while, then goes back." "His name's Buddy," I said. "He's our dog." The man nodded, then patted the bench beside him. I hesitated, then sat. "This spot belonged to my wife," he said. "She used to come here every afternoon, read her book, feed the birds. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to come back. Not for a long while, but last week something told me to try. I sat here, and then this guy showed up like he'd been waiting." I looked at Buddy, lying with his head on the man's shoe. "You think he's doing this on purpose?" I asked. "Oh, I don't think dogs do anything by accident," the man replied. "He knows what he's doing." We sat in silence for a while, letting the breeze pass through the branches. Eventually, Buddy stood and trotted off, heading home without a backward glance. The man stayed seated. I stood to leave, but turned back and asked, "What's your name, sir?" "Walter," he said. "Walter Green." The next day, Buddy brought me back there again. Walter was waiting. From then on, it became a second stop in Buddy's route. Mrs. Cartwright in the morning, Walter in the afternoon. And at night, Buddy returned to us. Every evening, he sat beside Owen as he did his homework, nudged his hand when he got too distracted, and curled up by his bed until he fell asleep. I started wondering how many others there were. Was Buddy keeping more schedules I didn't know about? Visiting more people who needed him in ways they couldn't explain? I tried not to obsess, but curiosity won. One Saturday, I made a list and spent the day trailing Buddy at a respectful distance. We visited Mrs. Cartwright, of course. He sat with her on the porch, walked with her halfway to the mailbox, then waited patiently as she dropped in an envelope before turning back. Then we visited Walter. He had a thermos this time and offered me a cup. We all sat in the clearing for a while, sharing stories and listening to cardinals chirp above. But then Buddy kept walking. He led me down a different trail, through more woods, until we came to a small nursing home on the edge of town. He didn't walk through the front. Instead, he veered toward the back, where a woman in a wheelchair sat under a canopy. A nurse was beside her, feeding squirrels with pieces of cracker. Buddy trotted up, gently nosed her hand, and laid down beside her chair. The nurse smiled. "Ah, it's Buddy. Right on time." I froze. "You know him?" "Everyone here knows Buddy," she said. He's been coming by for about 2 weeks now. We don't know where he comes from, but he always visits Mary. Then he makes his rounds. It's like he knows who needs a little company." Mary was blind, I learned. She couldn't see Buddy, but she could feel him. Her hand rested on his back while she told him stories I couldn't quite hear. Buddy didn't move. That day, I sat nearby and watched. And for the first time, I felt like I understood something I hadn't before. Buddy wasn't just our dog. He was everybody's. At dinner that night, I told Owen. He looked thoughtful for a long time. Then he said, "Do you think maybe he's like a helper? Like a secret one?" "I think he just listens better than most people do," I replied. The next day, I found a note slipped under our doormat. It was handwritten on floral paper. "Dear Buddy's family, I don't know how to thank you. Your dog comes every morning and makes me feel like I matter again. After I lost my sister, I thought no one would sit beside me again. But Buddy does, every single day. Thank you for letting him share his love. Sincerely, Lillian, Apartment 103. My hands trembled as I read it aloud. More notes came after that, tucked under the fence, left in our mailbox, pinned to our gate. Each one a story, a thank you, a piece of someone's life that had been changed just by Buddy showing up. One man wrote that he hadn't spoken aloud in weeks, but Buddy made him hum again. A teenager said Buddy waited outside the skate park until his panic attack passed. Another note said Buddy had reminded them what kindness felt like. We hadn't trained him, we hadn't asked him, but Buddy knew. And I started to see the pattern. He went to people who were waiting, people sitting alone, people who had grown quiet. He didn't bark, he didn't jump, he just sat. Let them know he was there. And that somehow was enough. And all this time, he still came home to us, like clockwork. I started keeping a journal, writing down the names, the places, the times. It was like charting constellations. Buddy's sky of kindness was growing, and something told me we were only beginning to see its shape. The first time someone came to our door asking for Buddy, it was a teenage boy with braces and a skateboard under one arm. He was standing on our front step, looking nervous, twisting a folded paper in his hand. I opened the door with my usual greeting smile, but before I could say a word, he blurted out, "Is Buddy here?" I blinked. Yes, he's inside. Why?" The boy held up the paper. It was a hand-drawn picture of a golden retriever sitting beside a tree. "I made this for him. I know it's weird, but he's helped me. A lot." I stepped back and called for Buddy. He padded up slowly, tail swaying, and sat beside me. The boy crouched, held out the drawing, and Buddy sniffed it before licking the boy's hand. "Thanks," the boy whispered. "I just wanted to say thanks." After he left, I pinned the drawing to our fridge. It wasn't the last one. More people came, sometimes just to pat Buddy on the head. Others brought cards or photos. One elderly woman brought a small stuffed squirrel, clearly meant to resemble a toy Buddy had apparently chased with her on her walks. Owen took it all in like someone watching his dog become a local legend. He even created a small box labeled Buddy's Fan Mail and kept everything organized. Drawings, thank you cards, even a pair of knitted booties that someone made for Buddy's paws, just in case he ever gets cold. Buddy never wore them, but Owen insisted we keep them anyway. One Thursday afternoon, after Buddy had returned from his visit to the nursing home, I noticed something unusual. He stood at the edge of the porch, looking across the road, but not toward Mrs. Cartwright's house. He was staring at the house next to hers. The old Walker place. It had been vacant for years, windows boarded up, Lawn overgrown. No lights, no movement, just a forgotten box of siding and memories. But Buddy wouldn't look away. The next morning, he sat by that house instead. I followed, crouched beside him, and looked up at the windows. One of the boards on the bottom floor had shifted slightly, just enough for me to see through. A curtain moved. I stood quickly, heart suddenly thudding. Was someone inside? Later that day, I called the town clerk. I asked if the Walker place had been sold or occupied. The answer was no. But the next morning, Buddy was back at that same door. I brought over a small paper bag with some biscuits and knocked gently. "Hello? Is someone here? I live next door, just checking in." No answer. But that evening, the biscuits were gone. And Buddy wagged his tail once when he saw the empty bag. The following day, I brought a note. Simple. Just a few words scribbled on a sticky pad. "Hi there. If you need anything, we're just across the street. Buddy's family." This time, when I returned later, there was a new sticky note beside mine. "Thank you. Please don't tell anyone I'm here. I just need time." I felt a twist of worry, but I also respected the message. Someone was hurting, and they had found their way to silence, and Buddy had found them. For 2 weeks, Buddy sat outside that house every morning. I brought warm drinks in a thermos, snacks, sometimes extra socks. Always left them with a note. Eventually, the sticky notes turned into longer ones. Her name was Rachel. She was 28. She had lost her job in the city, had nowhere to go, and somehow remembered the old Walker house where her aunt had lived decades ago. She wasn't trying to steal or squat. She just needed space to think, to breathe. Buddy never pushed. He just sat, gave her time. One morning, the door opened slightly, and Rachel peeked out. She looked tired, but kind. She knelt, touched Buddy's fur, and whispered something I couldn't hear. When she saw me on the sidewalk, she gave a faint wave. That afternoon, she left another note. "I think I'm ready to call someone about help, but only because of Buddy. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible." I connected her with a friend who worked at a housing nonprofit. Within days, Rachel had a place to stay. Not perfect, but warm. Safe. When she moved, Buddy didn't follow her. He just sat at the curb, watched the car pull away, and then turned back toward home. It was like he knew the chapter had closed. Another week, another visit. Buddy began walking with Mrs. Cartwright now, all the way to the end of the block. She'd taken to calling him her daily tonic. Walter brought a blanket to the bench in the woods and started playing harmonica while Buddy lay near his feet. At the nursing home, the staff had made a laminated pass that read, "Buddy, official therapy visitor, unpaid but very loved." It hung from a string by the back entrance. Then, something unexpected happened. The mayor's office called. Apparently, word about Buddy had gotten around. Someone had started a social media page called Buddy's Route, and it had gained local attention. People were sharing stories, tagging photos, and asking if they could join him on his walks. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. But Owen had an idea. What if we did something small, like a Walk with Buddy Day, just once a month? People can join, but we keep it chill. No cameras, no press, just kindness. We planned it for a Saturday. 30 people showed up. Some had canes, some were kids. One man had driven from 2 towns over just to say thank you. Buddy didn't seem fazed. He led the group at his usual slow pace, stopping at familiar spots. Mrs. Cartwright's porch, Walter's bench, the nursing home. People waved. Some joined along the way. Others just stood on their porches, hands over their hearts. A little girl knelt to hug Buddy at the park entrance and whispered, "I've been sad for a long time, but I feel better now." That night, Owen sat beside Buddy on the porch and said, "I think he has a map in his heart." I smiled. "I think you're right." We kept the monthly walks going, always low-key, always optional, but each time more people came. Some brought other dogs, some came in wheelchairs. One woman came just to walk behind and cry softly, whispering that she missed her son. Buddy never judged. He just walked. Slow, steady, reliable. That fall, the leaves turned golden, and Buddy seemed to move a little slower himself. He rested more, took longer naps. But every morning, he still rose, he still went, and people began leaving treats on porches, bowls of water, blankets at the nursing home, notes pinned to trees. "You're not alone. Take your time. We're here." Buddy says hi. His route had become more than a pattern. It was a path of hope, one paw print at a time. One night, just after Owen went to bed, I found Buddy standing by the door again. He looked up at me, tail thumping once. "You ready?" I asked. He barked once, quietly, then turned. I followed. We walked in silence under the stars, down the cul-de-sac, past the sleeping houses, through the woods. At the clearing, Walter was already there. He looked up and smiled. "You brought company tonight." I nodded, sat beside him. Buddy lay between us. "I lost my daughter 10 years ago," Walter said softly. "Never talked about it much. But this dog, he made it easier. I talk now, even if it's to a dog." I said nothing, just listened. The stars overhead blinked gently. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Buddy closed his eyes. When we walked home that night, I felt lighter. I understood now. Buddy wasn't just healing others. He was healing me, too. In the morning, he was gone again. But I knew he'd be back. He always came back. Because there was still more work to do. The wind blew a little harder that week, carrying the first hints of winter into our small town. Leaves skittered across the sidewalks like restless thoughts, and even Buddy seemed to walk with more purpose, as if the changing season was something he needed to prepare for. He still followed his route, stopping by each house, visiting each person on his list, but now he paused a little longer at each stop, laid down more often than he used to, and leaned into hands with a bit more weight than before. I had started to notice that Buddy took more naps in the middle of the day, usually in sun-drenched patches near our living room window. Owen and I didn't talk about it out loud, but we both noticed the way he breathed deeper when he slept, like his dreams took more energy than they once did. Still, every morning, just as the sky began to shift from dark blue to gray, Buddy rose and stretched and trotted toward the front door, ready to begin again. One morning, I decided to accompany him from the start. I brewed coffee early, scribbled a quick note for Owen, and zipped my coat before Buddy even looked back. He waited on the porch, eyes bright despite the chill, tail giving a single rhythmic thump against the wood. He led me first to Mrs. Cartwright's house, as always. She was already on the porch, bundled in a scarf, a steaming mug in her hands. Buddy climbed up the 2 steps and sat beside her without hesitation. She looked up at me and smiled. "He told me you'd be joining today," she said. I laughed gently. "He didn't even tell me." We sat there for a while, letting the silence stretch between us. Mrs. Cartwright hummed softly, an old song I didn't recognize, and Buddy sighed contentedly. As we stood to leave, she reached out and touched my hand. I used to think silence was something to escape, she said. Now I think it's something to share. He taught me that. Our next stop was the bench in the woods. Walter was already there too, as though Buddy had sent out invitations I wasn't aware of. He was wrapped in a thick coat and had a thermos resting beside him. His harmonica sat in his lap, untouched. "Thought I might see you today," he said, tipping his head in greeting. We sat together, all three of us, and let the sun rise a little higher. Walter eventually picked up the harmonica and played a few soft notes that fluttered out into the trees like sleepy birds. Buddy rested his chin on my foot and didn't move. After that, Buddy led me down a different trail, not toward the nursing home this time, but up toward the ridge that overlooked the old riverbed. There was a narrow path lined with pine trees, and at the end, a small overlook with a view of town. Buddy sat down there, breathing deeply, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder. The town below looked smaller than usual, peaceful and still. A thin wisp of smoke curled from someone's chimney. Cars sat in driveways. A mail truck moved slowly along the road. Buddy didn't move. I could see the way his chest rose and fell, slower now, steadier, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I wondered how long he'd known this spot, how many times he'd sat here alone. As we headed home, something caught Buddy's attention near the edge of the road. A cardboard box sat beneath a pine tree, its top slightly open. He trotted toward it and sniffed. I approached more cautiously and saw what was inside. 2 kittens, barely more than fluff and wide eyes. No mother in sight. Buddy nudged the box gently with his nose, then looked up at me. "Someone left them," I murmured. Buddy sat beside the box, still as stone. I took off my scarf and wrapped the kittens carefully. They trembled, but didn't resist. Buddy walked beside me all the way home, never once darting ahead. Owen was just waking up as we came in, and his eyes grew wide when he saw the tiny bundle in my arms. "What happened?" "Someone left them by the ridge," I said. Buddy found them. He named them Pip and Pebble. We took them to the vet, posted a notice in town, but no one claimed them. They stayed with us, sleeping beside Buddy, trailing behind him like ducklings. Buddy tolerated their play with the patience of a saint. Pip was the bold one. Pebble, the quieter twin. They followed Buddy on his route one morning, much to my surprise. He paused at the corner, waited for them to catch up, then continued, slower than usual. Walter laughed when he saw them. "Your crew's getting bigger," he said. Mrs. Cartwright began leaving milk in a saucer next to Buddy's usual spot. At the nursing home, a resident crocheted them tiny collars, and the route grew again. People began writing not just to Buddy now, but to Pip and Pebble too. Children sent crayon drawings. A boy with autism made a comic strip about the trio, calling them the Comfort Patrol. One note from a teacher read, "My students say they want to be more like Buddy. They made kindness goals. We call them paw promises." A bakery on the edge of town started setting out a small basket of dog treats each morning with a sign that read, "Reserved for Buddy. Pip and Pebble welcome too." And on a fence post near the library, someone hung a hand-painted wooden sign. "If you see Buddy today, remember to be kind." It was as if his route had created a trail of goodness, a ripple effect that kept spreading. I asked Owen one evening if he thought Buddy knew what he was doing. "I think he just loves people so much he can't help it," Owen said. "And now other people are learning how to love better too." The words stayed with me. Especially one morning when we passed a man sitting alone on a bench near the high school, head bowed, shoulders hunched. Buddy slowed, veered toward him. The man looked up, startled. Then tears filled his eyes. "I lost my job yesterday," he whispered. "I came here to be alone. I didn't expect anyone." Buddy rested his head on the man's knee. The man broke down, hands buried in golden fur. No words, just presence. And somehow, it was enough. That night, I stood in the backyard and looked up at the stars. Buddy lay beside my feet, Pip and Pebble curled together nearby. Owen had fallen asleep on the couch, a book still open on his chest. I thought of all the people Buddy had touched, all the lives he had walked into with quiet feet and a listening heart. And I knew, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever magic was inside him, it was something we'd never fully understand. But we didn't need to. It was enough to follow his lead, to show up, to sit beside someone, and to listen, just like Buddy always had. The next morning, I saw something on our porch. A hand-carved wooden plaque painted with care. It read, "This is Buddy's home, where kindness begins." I picked it up and smiled. Buddy barked once behind me, soft, happy, then turned toward the street, tail wagging. The day was waiting. The cold set in a little deeper that week, a sharper edge to the wind, the morning slower to brighten. Frost laced the corners of our windows, and Owen took to warming his socks on the heater before pulling them on each morning. Buddy didn't mind the weather. He still woke early, tail wagging softly, paws tapping against the front door, ready for his daily path. Pip and Pebble, less fond of the chill, stayed bundled inside most mornings, curled on the folded blanket we kept beside the radiator. But Buddy remained steadfast. I found myself joining him more often now, wrapping a scarf around my neck and clutching a thermos of tea as we made our first stop at Mrs. Cartwright's porch. She'd taken to placing a second chair beside her own, just in case someone decided to join her. Buddy, as usual, settled on the welcome mat, his tail brushing the air every so often. "You know," Mrs. Cartwright said one morning, "I started writing again." I blinked. "Really? That's wonderful." She nodded, her breath rising like smoke in the cold. "I used to write short stories, gave it up when Harold passed, but lately I find I have characters whispering to me again. I think Buddy stirred something awake." She pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it and read the title, "The Dog Who Waited for Winter." My eyes stung just for a second. At Walter's bench, Buddy was greeted with a melody. Walter had brought a small radio that played low jazz as he sat bundled under his favorite quilt. When Buddy approached, Walter switched it off and greeted him like an old friend. "Been thinking about carving again," he said as I sat beside him. "Used to whittle, you know. Gave it up when arthritis got worse. But my hands are steadier now. Not because they don't hurt, just don't feel as heavy." He pulled a small piece of wood from his coat pocket. It was the beginning of a figure, the outline of a dog. "Thought I'd try making him," Walter said. "The dog who brought back my mornings." Buddy rested his head on Walter's knee and closed his eyes. The trail continued. Down through the woods, around the bend near the old bakery, the shop owner, Ruth, had begun setting out a new treat, pumpkin biscuits shaped like paws. "I had customers asking if we had Buddy snacks," she told me with a grin. "So now we do. He's good for business. But more than that, he's good for hearts." We reached the nursing home just before noon. Buddy's arrival had become part of the daily schedule. Residents waited by windows. Staff paused what they were doing. A nurse with curly red hair leaned down to tie a small green ribbon around Buddy's neck. "Holiday colors," she said. "We're decorating him now. Makes everyone smile." Buddy didn't resist. He stood still as a statue, then wagged once when she stepped back. One of the residents, a man in his 80s named Henry, wheeled himself out to the garden. "You bring light, pup," he said in a voice rough with age. "My son doesn't visit anymore, but you do. That counts, more than you know." Buddy sat beside his chair. I stayed in the background, watching. There was nothing dramatic about it. No barking or bounding joy. Just stillness. Presence. Henry patted his hand gently on Buddy's back and started humming. When we left, I felt the warmth of it clinging to me. A kind of peace that didn't come from words. Back home, Owen greeted Buddy with a blanket draped over his shoulders like a cape. "You're the town's superhero now," he said with a grin. Buddy shook it off gently, then flopped beside Pip and Pebble, who instantly climbed over him in a tangle of fur and squeaks. That night, I found another note in our mailbox. This one was from someone named Charlotte. She said she'd never met Buddy directly, but had seen him walking with different people around town. "There's something special about a dog who chooses to be where he's needed most," the letter read. "He reminds me to get up in the morning, even if it's just to sit quietly. Thank you for sharing him." Attached was a photo of a sunrise, taken from the hill near the ridge. I showed it to Owen. "I think Buddy's teaching people to see again," he said. "Not just look, but really see." As the days got shorter, Buddy's pace slowed a bit more. His hips sometimes clicked when he stood up. Owen began helping him up the porch steps at night. Still, Buddy never missed a day. One morning, it snowed. Just a dusting. Enough to blanket the rooftops and make the sidewalk crunch underfoot. I assumed Buddy would skip his route that day, but he stood by the door at his usual time, tail thumping with quiet resolve. I bundled up and followed. His paw prints made tracks through the white. We stopped at each house, each porch, each corner. People left small gifts, knitted scarves, bowls of warm broth, even a tiny pair of earmuffs that someone had sewn for Pip, who trotted along for part of the journey. Mrs. Cartwright came out just to say thank you. "I mailed my first story this week," she told me. "A magazine is going to print it. I don't think I could have done it without him." She leaned down, hugged Buddy, and whispered, "You're my brave boy." At Walter's bench, the snow had already been brushed off. Walter stood waiting with a new carving, this one more finished. It showed Buddy lying down, head on his paws, eyes half closed. "I call it Rest Between Kindnesses," Walter said. He handed it to me. The wood was smooth and warm in my palm. "I'm going to keep carving," he said. "Maybe open a little stall at the holiday fair. People keep asking. I thought I had nothing left to share. Turns out I just needed someone to remind me." Buddy stood, nudged Walter's knee, and turned to lead us back. As we passed the library, I noticed a new display in the window. It was filled with letters. Photocopies of all the notes people had written about Buddy, strung on ribbons, surrounded by paper paw prints cut from old book pages. A sign above it read, "The Buddy Project. Acts of Quiet Kindness." I stepped closer and saw one from a girl named Jenna. She wrote, "Buddy sat with me on the curb when I didn't make the soccer team. I didn't tell anyone I was crying, but he knew, and it made all the difference." Another from a man named Tony. "Buddy waited with me at the bus stop after my car broke down. I'd just lost my dad. I think he felt it. I didn't cry until he looked at me. Then I couldn't stop. So many voices, so many moments, and none of them loud. That night, Owen and I sat on the porch, a blanket across both our laps. Buddy dozed at our feet. The sky was clear, the stars bright. "You think he knows how many people he's helped?" Owen asked. I looked at Buddy, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. "I think he just wants them to feel seen," I said. "That's enough for him." Owen leaned his head on my shoulder. "Maybe that's enough for all of us." The wind picked up, and Buddy's ears twitched, but he didn't wake. He was home. And tomorrow, the route would begin again. The snow came down heavier 2 days later, blanketing the entire neighborhood in quiet white. Streets were muffled. Trees wore thick coats, and for a little while, it felt like the entire town had gone still. School was canceled, and Owen celebrated by making hot chocolate with double the marshmallows and dragging out his sled from the garage. He asked if Buddy wanted to come outside and watch him build a snow fort, but Buddy remained curled up by the fireplace, eyes following Owen with affection, but no intention of rising. I wasn't surprised. He'd gone on his route that morning despite the weather, but it had clearly tired him out. The older he got, the more carefully he rationed his energy. And still nothing, not cold, not snow, not creaky joints, could stop him from showing up. Just after lunch, I noticed a new note tucked into the corner of our mailbox. It was folded into a small square, protected from the snow by a strip of tape. I peeled it off and brought it inside, opening it slowly as I stirred my tea. It was from a girl named Rosie. She wrote in neat, looping handwriting that she had met Buddy only once, sitting with him for 10 quiet minutes near the edge of the library garden. She didn't say much more, only that she had felt alone that day, and that Buddy made her feel like maybe the world wasn't ignoring her. At the bottom, she had drawn a small paw print with the words, "He listened," and that saved me. I set the note down carefully and stared at the steam rising from my mug. There were dozens of stories like that now. Some from people we knew, many from strangers. A local college student had written a poem about Buddy that went semi-viral on social media. A woman who ran the town's flower shop created a special bouquet arrangement called Golden Hope in Buddy's honor, with soft yellows and whites to mirror his fur. And yet, none of this changed him. The fame didn't distract him, and the praise didn't pull him off course. Each morning, he followed the same route with the same quiet heart, moving from house to house, bench to bench, porch to porch. Always sitting, always staying. That afternoon, as the snow kept falling, I saw Buddy rise from the hearth and walk slowly toward the door. I didn't try to stop him. I knew better. "Be careful," I said as I opened the door. He stepped into the snow, steady despite the weather, and disappeared down the white-coated path. Later, I bundled up and followed his trail, a line of paw prints pressed into the fresh snow. They led to Mrs. Cartwright's, where she sat wrapped in a red blanket, a thermos beside her, steam rising. Buddy was nestled at her feet, his head resting on her boot. "He made it through the storm," she said with a smile. "I wasn't sure if he would, but he did. I didn't think anyone would come today." I nodded. He always does. We shared a few quiet moments before Buddy stood and moved on. I followed at a distance, watching him make his way to Walter's bench. Walter had cleared it of snow with a shovel, a small gesture of readiness. I was hoping he'd come, Walter said, wiping his forehead. It gets harder to get out here these days, but knowing he's coming keeps me moving. He patted the bench beside him. I sat. Buddy lay down between us. Walter pulled a folded cloth from his coat and unwrapped a new carving. This one was of 3 figures, Buddy in the middle, with 2 smaller animals on either side, Pip and Pebble. Thought I'd try to capture the whole crew this time, Walter said. Didn't think I had another in me, but I did. We sat there until the wind picked up. Buddy stood first, shook off the snow, and turned. The path led next to the nursing home, as always. A few residents were already waiting, huddled beneath the overhang. One woman reached down with a gloved hand and placed a small biscuit in front of Buddy. "For our good boy," she said. "Braver than any of us." The snow slowed, then stopped altogether. By the time Buddy and I returned home, the clouds had parted and the sky glowed pale pink above the rooftops. Owen had finished his fort and was standing outside, mittens off, cheeks red. "Did he do his whole route?" he asked. "Every stop," I said. Owen crouched to scratch behind Buddy's ears. "You're amazing," he whispered. "You know that, right?" Buddy yawned and pressed his face into Owen's coat. That night, we made a fire and curled up in the living room, Buddy snoring softly beside the couch. Pip and Pebble were a tangle of paws and tails against his side. Owen dozed off with a book in his lap, and I found myself staring at the collection of cards and letters we had pinned to the corkboard by the window. We were running out of space. The next morning, I visited the library and asked if we could use a wall. The librarian, Mrs. Harding, said yes before I finished my sentence. "We were thinking of asking you," she said. "Some of the patrons have been bringing in letters and drawings. We were just waiting to see if you'd say it first." We created a display titled The Route of Kindness. It featured a map of the town, dotted with small paw print stickers marking each of Buddy's known stops. Every week, new letters were added, some taped to the map itself, others pinned to corkboards around it. Children added doodles. Teens wrote notes of thanks. Seniors shared poems. It became a quiet spot for visitors. A place to read, reflect, and remember that someone, a golden dog named Buddy, had walked through this town and made people feel whole again. One evening, as I was updating the wall, a young woman approached me. She had a toddler on her hip and a look of gratitude in her eyes. "I don't know if you remember," she said, "but a year ago I was sitting on that bench across from the bus stop, crying because I thought I'd failed at everything. Buddy sat with me, didn't move, just stayed. I talked for maybe 10 minutes. He didn't leave, not once." She adjusted the toddler in her arms. That night I decided not to give up. And now, here I am. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes silence says more. She left a note for the board before she walked away. I added a new sticker to the map. Back home, Buddy was sprawled across the rug, the kittens nestled against him. Owen had built a miniature replica of the town from cardboard and placed tiny figurines of Buddy and his stops throughout. "I'm calling it Buddyville," he said proudly. "Everywhere you go, someone's smiling." I kissed the top of his head. "Sounds about right." That weekend, the bakery hosted a small fundraiser. They called it Kindness Day, with all proceeds going to the local shelter and pet food bank. People came in droves, sharing Buddy stories, laughing, crying, hugging. Someone had painted a mural on the bakery wall. Buddy standing at the top of a hill, looking over the town, his ears perked, tail up. The caption read, "One dog, one town. Infinite love. I stood in front of it for a long time. Later that night, as snow began falling again, Buddy nudged the door with his nose. I opened it. "Going out again?" He looked back at me, tail wagging gently. I pulled on my coat and followed. We didn't say anything, just walked. Because sometimes the greatest kindness needs no words at all, just footsteps in the snow, a warm body by your side, and the steady knowledge that you are not alone. By mid-December, the town was glowing with holiday lights strung across porches, trees wrapped in twinkling strands, and windows adorned with paper snowflakes made by school children. The air carried the crisp scent of pine and chimney smoke, and everywhere you went, there was music, gentle carols from radios, laughter from neighbors, and the soft thud of boots crunching snow. In the middle of it all, Buddy carried on like always. No fanfare, no change in rhythm. Just his route, his pause, and his presence. This time of year was usually the hardest for people. Memories came back sharper, silence felt heavier, and loneliness crept into places you didn't expect. But Buddy, somehow, filled in the gaps. The day the first real snowstorm of the season hit, I thought Buddy might finally stay in. The wind had picked up during the night, and by morning, a thick layer of snow covered the world in white silence. Owen and I stood at the window, watching as the branches swayed and flurries danced through the air. Buddy was curled on the rug, tail still, ears perked. "Maybe he'll stay home today," Owen said softly. "It's really cold." But as if on cue, Buddy stood, stretched, and made his way to the door. I opened it slowly, bracing for the gust of wind, and watched as he stepped out into the snow. His movements were careful, slower than in autumn, but his eyes were steady, determined. I bundled up and followed, giving Owen a wave as I stepped off the porch. Mrs. Cartwright's porch had been swept clean sometime that morning. A path had been shoveled through her walkway, and she was already sitting in her chair, wrapped in 2 blankets and a wool hat. "You knew he'd come," I said. "He always comes," she replied. Buddy sat beside her, resting his head on her boot, eyes half-lidded. We didn't stay long. It was too cold, but those 10 minutes of silence warmed more than the tea I'd brought. As we stood to go, Mrs. Cartwright reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small red envelope. "For Buddy," she said, "a Christmas card." The next stop was Walter's bench. The trail was harder to follow now, the path less visible under the snow, but Buddy knew the way by heart. When we arrived, I was surprised to see the bench covered in a waterproof tarp, candles flickering in glass jars placed around it. Walter was there, of course, but he wasn't alone. 3 people stood beside him, his son and 2 grandchildren. Buddy wagged his tail as he approached, and the smallest child clapped her mittened hands. "Grandpa told us all about Buddy," she said. Walter's face beamed as he introduced us, and for the next half hour we shared stories. The children played in the snow, Buddy watching them with gentle eyes. Walter gave me a new carving, this one of the whole town gathered around a single figure of Buddy, a tiny smile carved into his face. "This year, I'm making one for every family that Buddy has touched," he said. "Might take me until spring, but I've got the time." Our visit to the nursing home that day was quieter than usual. A few residents had been taken to the hospital with seasonal illness, and the rest were bundled indoors. Still, a nurse met us at the side entrance with a basket of notes. "Some of them aren't well enough to come out today," she said, "but they still wrote to him. We'll read them aloud tonight." She bent to tie another ribbon around Buddy's neck, this one gold with a tiny jingle bell attached. "He's our Christmas star," she said. He keeps showing up, no matter what. By the time we reached the library, the storm was easing. Inside, a new section had been added to the Buddy wall. It was filled with Christmas cards, drawings of Buddy in a Santa hat, and letters from families sharing what his visits had meant to them this past year. One card read, "This year we were falling apart. Buddy reminded us what love looks like." Another, "He never said a word, but I heard everything I needed." There was even a note written in blocky, backward letters from a kindergartner named Tommy. I was sad. Then Buddy sat. Now I smile. Back home, we hung Mrs. Cartwright's red envelope on our own tree. Owen created a small stocking for Buddy, labeled with blocky white felt letters. Pip and Pebble had their own too, although they showed more interest in batting at the ornaments than any gifts inside. That weekend, the community center hosted a holiday gathering. They called it a Night of Light, and there were strings of lanterns, tables of cookies, and a corner booth where people could write thank you cards to anyone who'd helped them through the year. Half the table was filled with notes addressed to Buddy. He arrived midway through the evening, tail wagging gently, wearing a red scarf that someone had left on our porch. Children swarmed to pet him, adults smiled through tears, and someone even sang a song they'd written about him. A gentle melody with lyrics like, "A quiet step, a faithful friend, a heart that never ends." Buddy didn't stay long. He never did. But his visit felt like a blessing. The next morning, our mailbox held a thick envelope. Inside were letters from a third-grade class, each one decorated with drawings, stars, snowflakes, and messages of kindness. "You make people smile. I want to be kind like you. Even my grandpa talks about Buddy. You're my favorite part of this town." Owen taped them all around Buddy's sleeping spot. He looked up once, licked Owen's hand, and went back to sleep. One evening, just before Christmas, I joined Buddy for a nighttime walk. The snow crunched softly beneath our feet, and the sky was clear, filled with stars. We walked through the neighborhood, past the glowing windows, past the school, past the park. At the edge of town, we came upon a man sitting alone on a bench outside the gas station. He wore a heavy coat and clutched a paper cup in his hands. Buddy walked straight to him and sat down. The man looked startled at first, then slowly smiled. "Hey, pup," he said. "Didn't think I'd see anyone tonight." He glanced up at me. "You live nearby?" "A few blocks over," I said. "This is Buddy." "I've heard of him," the man replied. "Didn't know he was real." We sat with him for a while. He told me his name was Nate. He was in between jobs, staying in his car until something came through. He'd lived in the next town over until recently. "Didn't plan on being here long," he said. "But this dog found me yesterday. Sat down just like this. Didn't move. Like he knew." I asked if he needed anything. He hesitated, then nodded. I gave him my number and promised to return with food and some information in the morning. Before we left, Buddy pressed his head gently against Nate's knee. Nate blinked fast and said, "Thank you." The next day, we brought food, gloves, and a blanket. Buddy led the way. I connected Nate with a shelter contact who had space and job referrals. He left that afternoon. But before he did, he wrote a note. "Your dog found me in the dark. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. I don't know why he came, but I'm glad he did. I'm gonna be okay now. I believe that, because Buddy showed up." Owen read the letter 3 times. Then he whispered, "I think Buddy saved Christmas." I didn't correct him, because I kind of thought he was right. The week after Christmas always felt a little quieter in town, like everyone had finally exhaled after the excitement of the holidays. Lights still twinkled from rooftops, and wreaths clung to doors, but the buzz had faded into something more subdued. Buddy's pace slowed again, but not out of weariness, at least not entirely. It was the kind of slowness that came with reflection, like he was taking in more with every step. He still followed his route faithfully, but now he lingered at stops just a bit longer, held his gaze on people's faces a few seconds more. On New Year's Eve, I woke up early and found him already sitting by the front door, ears perked, tail tapping lightly on the wood floor. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood beside him, watching the faint pink hues of dawn rise through the windows. "Ready?" I asked as I zipped my coat. Buddy stood, stretched with a long, slow yawn, and we stepped into the frosty morning together. Mrs. Cartwright's porch light was already on. She stood bundled in a plaid coat, holding a thermos and a folded piece of paper. "Happy almost New Year," she said as we arrived. "You too," I replied. "You're up early." She held out the paper. "Another story. I've started collecting them now. Little vignettes, most of them inspired by him." Buddy sat beside her, gently bumping his head against her hip. She smiled. "I think this one might be about a dog who teaches people to hear what isn't being said." We stayed there for a little while, sipping coffee and watching the street slowly brighten. Buddy kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. Later that day, Owen and I decorated the house for our quiet New Year's Eve. Nothing elaborate, just a few streamers, some confetti on the kitchen table, and a homemade banner that read, "Thank you, Buddy," strung above the fireplace. Pip and Pebble took great interest in the streamers, knocking one down every hour. In the afternoon, Buddy rose from his nap and walked to the door again. "You want company this time?" I asked. He looked back at me, his eyes calm and steady. I took that as a yes. The snow had mostly melted, leaving behind patches of slush and brown grass. The sidewalks were damp, but the air held that crispness unique to December's final day. As we walked, we passed several people on porches, waving and calling out, "Happy New Year, Buddy!" Buddy wagged his tail at each greeting. At Walter's bench, we found not only Walter, but a small gathering of townsfolk. Someone had lit small lanterns and placed them in a circle around the bench. There was hot cider, cookies in paper bags, and a speaker playing soft jazz. Walter grinned as we approached. We figured this spot deserved its own celebration. We call it Buddy's Hour. Just some music, some memories, and a chance to thank the dog who made this year better. Buddy made his rounds, greeting each person, leaning into knees, nuzzling hands. He lay down by Walter's feet while I sat on the edge of the bench, quietly soaking it all in. A woman I didn't recognize approached me. "I live on Maple Street," she said. "Buddy started visiting me in September. I'd just lost my job. I didn't tell anyone. But he sat with me every morning for a week, gave me the courage to reach out. I have a new job now. I don't think I ever said thank you." She knelt to pet Buddy. "So, thank you." Buddy wagged his tail and rested his chin on her arm. That evening, back at home, Owen pulled out a notebook and started listing everyone he could remember who had written to or about Buddy. "I want to make a book," he said. "Not just about him, about what he's done, so it doesn't get forgotten." I nodded. "That's a beautiful idea." He wrote until midnight. When the new year rolled in, we raised sparkling cider and clinked glasses. Buddy lifted his head at the sound and let out a single soft bark. It felt like his way of saying, "I'm here. We're still together." The first few days of January were quiet. Cold mornings, soft afternoons. Buddy stayed close to home more often, occasionally skipping a stop if the weather got too harsh. But he never skipped Mrs. Cartwright's porch or Walter's bench. One afternoon, I found a small brown envelope tucked behind our mailbox. It wasn't addressed, but I recognized the handwriting from the notes on the library wall. It was from Rachel, the young woman who had stayed in the abandoned Walker house months ago. I wanted to thank you again. I've moved out of the shelter and into a small studio. I've started painting again. Buddy gave me the strength to face myself. I'm not sure anyone else could have done that. He sat when I needed him to. That saved me. There was a photo enclosed. A painting of Buddy, done in soft watercolors, him walking down a street, surrounded by paw prints and beams of golden light. I framed it and hung it in the hallway. Later that week, the mayor's office announced that the town would be creating an annual event called Buddy Day, scheduled for the first Saturday of spring. It would celebrate kindness, service, and quiet acts of love. No big speeches, just walks, shared meals, and time spent being there for one another. The news spread quickly. Children at school began making posters. The library added a sign-up sheet for volunteers. Someone even started a community garden project called Buddy's Patch, with plans to grow vegetables for the food pantry. Owen beamed when he heard the news. "He started something, didn't he?" he asked. "He did," I said. "And it's still growing." That Friday, we received a letter from a family in the next county over. They had heard about Buddy through a friend and wanted to visit. Their youngest child, who was recovering from leukemia, had become obsessed with the idea of meeting him. "He says Buddy is like a guardian angel," the mother wrote. "Even if we just get to see him from a distance, it would mean the world." They came that Sunday. Buddy, despite his age, trotted toward the boy like he'd known him forever. He sat gently beside him, letting the boy bury his face in his fur. The family cried. I cried. Owen held my hand and didn't say a word. When they left, the boy handed Buddy a drawing. A heart with a paw print inside it. "For your wall," he whispered. We added it that evening. The days that followed were filled with more stories, more quiet thank yous, more neighbors shoveling each other's walkways, more people smiling as they passed on the sidewalk, more reasons to believe that what Buddy had started wasn't just a fluke, it was a movement. One built on softness, on stillness, on showing up every single day, just like he always had. The morning that would become our last walk started like every other. The sky was soft gray, the trees bare, the sidewalks wet with a light overnight drizzle. Buddy rose from his spot by the fireplace just before dawn. He stretched, then padded to the door and sat down, waiting. I met him there with my coat already on and thermos in hand. Owen had fallen asleep, with his sketchbook on his chest again, his latest pages full of cartoon versions of Buddy, Pip, and Pebble rescuing townspeople one paw at a time. We stepped outside into the quiet, our breath visible in the chilly air. Buddy's pace was slower than usual, each step more deliberate. He paused longer at corners, as if savoring not just the sights, but the memories held in them. I didn't rush him. At Mrs. Cartwright's house, the porch light was on. She stepped out with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a new story folded into her coat pocket. This one was titled, "The Dog Who Waited for Everyone." She didn't say much, but when she crouched to hug Buddy, her shoulders trembled just a little. He rested his chin on her arm until she whispered, "Thank you for coming every time." We left the porch slowly and followed the path to Walter's bench. Walter was already there, but this time he didn't have a carving in his hand. Instead, he stood beside the bench, holding a small tin box wrapped in a ribbon. When we arrived, he opened it and showed us what was inside. Dozens of tiny wooden tokens, each shaped like a paw print. On the back of each one was a single word: kindness, patience, hope, love, courage. I thought people could carry them, Walter said, something to remind them to be more like him. He handed me a handful. I turned one over in my palm. The word was grace. Buddy sat quietly beside the bench, his tail brushing slowly against the ground. Walter reached down and placed a token beside him. "You gave us more than you'll ever know," he said. "I just wanted to give something back." We walked on. The nursing home garden was empty, the residents kept indoors due to the cold. But the staff had decorated the windows with new posters, drawings of Buddy made by residents, each one depicting a different moment. One showed him lying beneath Mary's wheelchair. Another had him in the hallway with a nurse. One was simply a heart with the words, "He stayed." A nurse opened the side door and called softly, "He still comes, even when we can't." Buddy stood at the door for a moment, then wagged his tail once and turned away. He led me toward the library next, stopping once to watch a group of kids pulling sleds down a hill. One of them saw us and shouted, "It's Buddy!" They ran over, hugging him, petting him, laughing. Their parents waved from nearby. One little girl pressed a small candy cane into my hand and said, "That's for him. It's peppermint. Dogs can't eat it, but he can keep it." At the library, the wall had grown. The map was now covered entirely in paw print stickers. Someone had added lights around the display, and there was a new section with testimonials from people outside the town. Letters from neighboring counties, all addressed to Buddy. They wrote about how his story had made them smile on hard days, how they had started sitting with their neighbors, volunteering, forgiving, reaching out. Buddy stood quietly in front of the display, his reflection mirrored in the library window. He looked up at me, and in that moment I felt something tighten in my chest. Something wordless, but certain. We headed home slowly. Each street we passed held another memory. The bakery where he'd received his first biscuit, the alley where he'd found the kittens, the bench where he had waited beside a grieving man without saying a word. People came out as we passed. Some just waved. Others came closer to kneel and whisper their thank yous. A woman pressed a bouquet of winter roses into my hand. A child gave him a painted rock with the words, "Good dog," on it. At our front porch, Owen was already waiting. He helped Buddy up the steps and wrapped him gently in a warm blanket. Pip and Pebble mewed from the doorway and curled around him the moment he lay down. We all sat with him, for hours, talking, remembering. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the snow-speckled lawn, Buddy's breathing grew slower, softer. His eyes opened one last time, looking at Owen, then at me. Then they closed, and he let out a breath like a soft wind. The world felt impossibly still. Owen didn't speak. He just rested his hand on Buddy's chest. Later that evening, neighbors arrived. Not because we called them, but because they knew. Somehow they knew. They brought candles, flowers, carvings, cards. Walter laid a final carving beside Buddy. A small golden retriever sitting on a bench, tail curled around its feet. Mrs. Cartwright read aloud her final story. The dog who made time matter. The mayor came with a proclamation. April 6th would officially be known as Buddy Day. The library announced they would house the full collection of letters, drawings, and maps in a permanent archive called the Buddy Room. We buried him in the backyard, beneath the tree where he used to lie in the summer shade. Pip and Pebble stayed beside the spot for hours. Owen visited it every morning. Weeks passed, then months. But the movement didn't stop. People still followed Buddy's route. They called them walks of kindness. The bench at the woods became a regular meeting place for people who just needed someone to sit beside them. Volunteers added benches in other spots too, each marked with a brass plate. Sit, stay, be kind. The bakery gave free cookies on Buddy Day. Mrs. Cartwright published her collection. It became a bestseller in the region. Walter sold out every carving. Owen's book was picked up by a local publisher. He titled it, "The Dog Who Sat with Everyone." Our front porch never stayed empty. People left tokens, cards, messages. The final letter we received came from someone passing through town. She wrote, "I didn't know your dog, but I saw the way people talked about him. I saw what he meant. I was passing through when I sat at one of his benches and someone joined me. We didn't speak much, but when we stood I felt lighter, and I understood. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that sometimes the greatest love is the one that simply stays." I pinned it beside the door, right next to the sign that had been there all along. This is Buddy's home, where kindness begins.